And it's really good to hear him today, have him here, and he can comment on some of this. What I wanted to do was just share a little bit about what you see up here in the display. And the treaty as we see it, and we've had some discussion leading up to this, the treaty as you see it in the exhibits is from the National Archives and Records. During the Flute administration, there was effort to go to the National Archives and Records and bring back actual copies of the treaty. So we do have the digital images that come from the National Archives and Records. And what you see when you look at this, and I'll be down there later on today if anybody has any specific questions, but when our people had negotiated this treaty in the years leading up to the signing in 1867, there were certain things that were really important. For example, the role of the Scouts. And in the signing of the first agreement, and you see it when you look at this, the first images, all the way, you see Articles 1 and 2, 3, all the way to about the center, and then you see a signature page. And that signature page starts with Gabriel Renville and on down, all of the head soldiers, leadership, and the Scouts. And then after that, it's signed. So that document is what our people went to Washington, D.C. to sign, that agreement. But the powers that be in Washington, D.C. had struck out sections 6 through 13. And when they struck out those sections, they struck out really important sections. They struck out, number 1 was the powers of the Scouts, the authorities of the Scouts. Also things related to lands and monies. And they insert into it a section that says basically the government will from time to time as they see fit allocate money. It's nothing like our people that had negotiated this treaty. It's nothing like what they had agreed to. So you can imagine there was a great outcry, protest from those leaders and the signers of the treaty. And we don't really know a whole lot about what goes on from any written record in that period of time. But what we do know is that Kangi Dutta, who is the last signature on that section in the mid one there, the original treaty with all of the sections, his signature is on there, or his X mark as you see it. This is an exact replica of what our people signed. And then when they strike out sections 6 through 13, oral history says, and I'll let others speak to this in more detail, oral history says that Kangi Dutta objected. Kangi Dutta objected, voiced protest, and we don't know maybe to what extent, but we do know that he is listed as missing or possibly kidnapped in that period of time. And then he's found later along the Potomac, deceased along the Potomac. And there are written statements from others. There's newspaper articles and things that are happening where they say that he had hung himself, which we know that that's not true because the police report actually states that they found him lying down with a strip of his blanket tied about his neck, attached to the branch of a tree that would never have supported the weight of a small child. So he did not hang himself. We really don't know what happened, and I know that others probably have ideas of what they think happened, who actually killed him. I've heard some say that he was killed as an example to force others to sign. Or we could speculate on why, but we do know that he lost his life there and he is buried in the Congressional Cemetery. So his story is a part of our treaty. And so it's important, I think, every time that we talk about our treaty that we honor him and remember him and recognize that in this last section you see, The final sections, the amendments, where the amendments are at the very end when it gets to the signature page, and it starts with Itanta Gabriel Renville on down, and then the very last signature has Kanki Duta, and it says dead next to his name. So when it comes to sharing the treaty, and occasionally at our office we do have people that ask for a copy of our 1867 treaty. And our treaty, of course, covers Spirit Lake. We had Mr. Garcia and I were having a discussion on the boundaries identified for the 67 treaty. So the land map that you see at the very end, that one shows the 67 treaty as it extends from the point down by Lake Compesca all the way up to Spirit Lake and on down. That's the entire land of the 67 treaty. So for young people, when you grow up hearing our elders say this was all our land, all of this, all the way up, this is the map that shows that. And then the importance, I think, of knowing, the treaty and what the treaty says. I am very careful when I share the treaty in its entirety, along with the sections that are struck out. So there are copies available, and I want to thank our Dakota Language Department for providing those. They have over on the table the copies of our 67 treaty for Spirit Lake and Sisseton-Wahpeton, and it shows what is recognized as our treaty if you were to pick up a law book. But we also have here the original sections too. And I do have it transcribed if anybody wanted to see it in that form. But bear in mind that when you look at the original treaty, that those things were not ratified, those sections 6 through 13. So that's part of the story. And I want to turn the mic over to Eric Lange to speak. And there are other people here that would love to hear from you. Just sitting way in back doesn't mean I'm not going to come and get you. I'll bring this microphone all the way back there, so you're warned. But Eric Lange?
Not here.
Not here, he said.
I'm not as loud as Tamara, so I'm not going to stand up. I don't really have the knowledge that some of these people up here, as far as the detail and the history of the treaty is. What I know about the treaty is kind of what I read briefly, in stuff that I read about the history of the tribes and stuff like that. So I'm not an expert on the treaty by any means. In fact, I view the treaty much more important as it relates to us today than it is from the historical context. But before I get into that, the treaty didn't make us sovereign. We always were sovereign nations. Before the Washichu came, we were sovereign then and we're sovereign now. A treaty just happens to have terms and things that they want us to live by. When the Pilgrims first landed on this continent, there was hundreds of tribes. Each of us had our own histories. Each of us had our own government. Each of us had our own way of living, our culture. And that was kind of a disadvantage to us when it came to treaty making, because we went by oral history. To us, our word was good enough. If we gave our word, we lived by our word. The Washichus lived by a written word, and their written word is only as good as the next document to come along. So when Indians heard phrases like, as long as the grass shall grow, they took that literally. They said, well, this is forever. The Washichus only took it as until the next treaty was written. So we were really at a disadvantage when it came to treaties. And as a result, we lost most of our land because we trusted people that we shouldn't have trusted. And treaties are made when you make a treaty, when we made a treaty with the United States or the colonial government, we didn't give up our way of life. We didn't give up our government. A treaty does not mean you strip away your way of life and your way of governing yourself. Treaty simply means an agreement between two governments. And I think there might be a little bit misunderstanding there when you say a treaty is going to make us do this and a treaty is going to make us do that. That's not the way treaties are legally defined. Under a treaty, we are allowed to retain our customs and culture. And I think that's the part that I want to talk about, in a minute or so. The other thing is we weren't conquered by the Washichas. We were simply overwhelmed by their number. And the United States and the colonial government, they seen that the Indians were good fighters, they were warriors, they were strong nations. So they didn't want to continue fighting. They seen that if they make treaties, it would be a lot more, it wouldn't cost as much money. So they started signing treaties with us. And as most of you know, they broke every single one of the treaties. But let me move on to what I think treaties mean to us today. Treaties give us something that no other community in the United States have. It gives us a sovereign status, which means we can do what we want on our 60 by 40 miles of territory that we own up in Spirit Lake. If we want a certain law to pass, we can pass it. If we want our workers to follow a certain policy, we could write that policy. If we want our tribal colleges and educational systems to teach a certain curriculum, we could pass a law that will make them comply with that. So, to me, we have the authority to do what we want. We don't need outside laws to come and tell us what we do. We could just pass our own laws. I understand that we have to live within the United States, and our laws should not be in conflict with someone. We have to work with them. But we have a lot of leniency. We talk about losing our culture. We talk about losing our language. There's nothing to prevent us from passing policy into to developing curriculum that teach our culture, that teach our history, that make it mandatory for people to, in certain positions, to at least study the language. Probably it's hard to be fluent in language after you get older, but at least you should be able to try to understand the language, because most people will tell you, most fluent speakers will tell you that the language is the history. If you want to understand Indian people, you have to understand the language. And Mom would always tell us that she couldn't really explain things to us because she never really taught us the language. She would try to explain it to us, but she couldn't because she didn't teach us the language. We need to take steps to rectify that, and we can. There's nothing stopping us. We could make sure that every meeting we have, like today, it starts with a prayer. We are a prayerful people. Everything we should do, everything we do, should start with a prayer. Even when we have government agencies come onto our reservation, there should be a protocol that they follow that honor our traditions and how we meet people, how we respect people. We can do all that. They're on our land. They could follow our laws. And the one thing that used to really bug me back in my younger days is, why do we have extradition agreements with the states and the counties? Back then, I didn't like the extradition because sometimes they were used against me back in my younger days. But now, why can't that go the other way? We talk about murdered and missing women, and a lot of that abuse occurs right on the reservation, but we can't do anything because the person is a white person and we can't arrest them. Why can't we? Why can't we negotiate with the state? Why can't we negotiate with the county and have our own extradition agreement with these organizations, so we could throw these people in jail, put them in jail, in our jail, where they will be punished for their crime, instead of letting them off scot-free to roam Rapid City or Devil's Lake or whatever big town that are close to the reservation. So that's my take on treaties. I think treaties at one time were really negative for us because they were used to put us on a small piece of land, and the policies back then were meant to assimilate us. That's no longer the case. And I want to point out the tribal colleges. The tribal colleges are very successful institutions because they promote the culture and the language in their curriculum and everything they do. They didn't have to give up their culture to be certified by the accreditation agencies. In fact, when I worked for the tribal colleges, we requested that 20% of our curriculum be about culture, 20%, and that was just getting started. There are ways to integrate our culture into every subject. I was a substitute teacher about 10 years ago. I owned a company, and in my free time I taught from grades K through 8th grade, and it was very easy for me to integrate our culture into any subject that I taught. Why can't we do that? Why can't we train people? I put together a proposal to do exactly that, and I took it to a couple tribal school boards, but they wouldn't even consider it. We got to get back to being proud of who we are, and we can't only go around saying Indian and proud, but we actually got to do something to show that we're proud. And we could start that by teaching some of that stuff in school. My first year teaching, way back 40 years ago, I took my kids, my students down to the library, and while I was waiting for them, I ran across a old album, St. Michael singers, powwow singers, and it was a drum group I listened to as a boy. So I checked that album out, and I checked that record player out, and I went upstairs and went back to my classroom. At the end of the classroom, after the students were gone, I put that record on. I turned it on loud. Good powwow music. The door opened, the curtain opened for the teacher next door, who just happened to be a Native American like me, an Indian like me, and she was going like this. She wanted me to turn the thing down. And I looked at her, and she went again. I just shook my head. I wasn't going to turn the darn thing down. The next morning, I got to school early. I put the record back on before the students came, and a janitor came in, another Indian, and they too wanted me to shut that thing down. My point is that we have to be not only be proud, walk around saying we're proud to be Indian, but we have to show it everywhere we go. No matter what we run into, no matter who we talk to, we got to admit that we are Indian and proud to be Indian. This lady next to me mentioned that we were I was a THPO for many years, and one of the things when we met with the federal agencies, the state agents, state officials, and stuff like that. One thing that we required every time we met, required that we start with a prayer. Oftentimes we had to interrupt them. They wanted to everybody started introducing themselves, and somebody would speak up and say, let's start with a prayer. So we got to carry that Indianness all the time, 100% of the time, not just when it's convenient or not just when we want to look good and stuff like that. So to me, that all comes back to this treaty. And this treaty gives us that power, that authority, to do this, to make some of these dreams reality, to save our language, to save our culture, because of these treaties give us that right. And I'm willing to argue with Tamara if she wants to.
Never happened. Never happened. Thank you, Eric. I'm sure that you guys can see why it was so important that he come and speak. I want to also give the microphone to Mr. Garcia.
I'm going to put the microphone here. Can you hear me? No? Sometimes it gets a little loud if you... my name is Louie Garcia, Wamashichu, and I've been with the Dakota people many, many years. My wife passed away after 49 years of marriage, and I teach at the college, Chakadeshka Chikana, at Fort Totten, and I teach Dakota history and culture. And you're probably thinking that I have a whole bunch of medals and documents behind me. But I taught at the college for 25 years in the carpentry department. So if any one of you need some assistance, like you see on television, let me know. I'll tell you how to read the plan and where to put the boards and so on and so forth. The other thing I wanted to say was I didn't know you were going to talk about Kariduta because my my mother-in-law, she was a direct descendant of him. And so I know quite a bit about that story. But I do a lot of reading of books, and not very many books come out about the Dakota people. And so I'm putting out a little want to tell you that the Minnesota Historical Society just published a book called Pijuta ZZ, and they left off the kapi at the end, but Pijuta ZZ kapi, and it's written by some of your relatives. And I suggest that you get that book because that's the name of the book. I'm not sure of the exact title, but the title is Pijuta ZZ. And Super Labat, maybe some of you know him. He's the one that did a lot of the writing for that. And nearly every page has a Dakota word that's spelled correctly in that book. So that's why I mention it to you. And he has a very good joke in there that I'm going to steal from him. You can read the joke in the book when you buy it. But these Dakotas, they went to a conference, maybe here at the resort here, or maybe in Bismarck, and they're sitting down in a restaurant. They're eating, and here some other Indians come in, so they waved them over. Come on, sit with us. Okay, so they sit down there, and they're looking at each other, and so they said, "Who are you guys?" Those guys said, "Oh, we're Crow Indians." "Oh," he says, the Dakotas say, "We're Crows too." "You are? You don't look like a Crow to me. Say something in Crow." He says, "Gah, gah." And with that, the fight started right in the restaurant. But you can read that joke right there. Anyway, I was looking at this page here, and it talks about how the treaty was written between Sissetuan and Wakwetuan. And then they say that the Cuthead Yankton A is included in there. And most people don't realize that the Pabaksa Ihanktawana owned the land before you did. That's why they're included in that treaty. They had to put that in. And so what happened is that they left. In fact, they're at Cannonball today because they're not even at Spirit Lake. There's a few descendants there, but the majority of the group are at Cannonball, North Dakota. They left and went over there. And so they talk a different dialect. And they originally left the land to follow the buffalo. And so the land was empty, and these characters come along, Sisset and Wapitan, I don't know who they are. They moved in and took over the land. And so that's why the treaty was written with the Pabaksa. And then, so today we have lots of Yankton Indians that were up north and came down and are there. So the reservation is really for the Yanktons, because some of the names match up for the ones that are south of you, along the river down there, way down south. But I want to talk about the boundaries of the reservation. You have two things. You have a treaty which says that is the law of the land. That can't be changed, even to today. Yes, Congress can meet and say, get rid of all these guys. The United States government can do a lot of things. But the land description that's written in the treaty has not changed. You look at the map, you can see the boundaries of the reservation. You still have that. That has not changed. What has changed is that in 1872, and then they amended it in 1873, you had an agreement. After 1871, the government said no more treaties. No more treaties. So you guys slipped in underneath, and you have a treaty, the law of the land. The agreements of 72 and 73 is an agreement. It's just like a business contract. So it's quite different. So I want you to realize that. And another thing, in here they talk about that part of the boundary is Chief's Bluff. Chief's Bluff at the head of the James River. And to this day, we don't know where the Chief Bluffs is. We don't know where that place is. I'm suspecting that it's called Hawk's Nest, and it's 10 miles west of Carrington, North Dakota. In that case there, unless we send somebody to Washington to dig into the old papers to see what they say, those maps are not quite correct. So these things the Dakotas up at Spirit Lake, we call that Huya Wayapa Khidi. They say Khidi because it was in the Yankton dialect when they wrote it in the books. That's an eagle with something in its mouth. The story is that they were stranded by a blizzard on the top of that mountain. It's a long mountain. It's 9 miles long. And so when the storm was over, one of you guys had a pet eagle. And they noticed that the pet eagle would go off, fly off, and bring something back. They discovered it was a piece of buffalo meat, fresh stuff. And they deduced that a buffalo was killed in that storm. Somehow, some way, maybe a wolf helped them out. And so they followed the eagle. They kept sending the eagle off until they found that buffalo carcass. And that's what saved them, because they were almost like we are today with 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so that's the story of that name, Huya Wayapa Khidi, or Hidi in Sasito. So I want you to realize the difference between an agreement, which Congress could kick that out anytime. Now, you probably don't know, but we lost up at Spirit Lake 64,000 acres was cut off the western end of the reservation. And that was done with an erroneous land survey. And it was a crooked man that did that. And then when they discovered the missing land, that was in 1883, white people are moving in on that land. And the government said, no, we're not going to kick them off. So today, when you look at the reservation, that it's missing a big chunk. Now that's for the future generation. What are they going to do? If you're going to help them down here, back them up, that's something that is what the tribes will have to do. Don't forget, the people at Sioux Valley, Manitoba, Spirit Lake, and then here at Sisseton, you're all the same group. You visit back and forth. So I want you to think about these things. Now, Spirit Lake has a little bit extra as far as the treaty goes. Now, when you look at Spirit Lake, Maniwaka, it's not this way. It's at an angle to the northwest. Now, there was another treaty made in 1825, and that's called the Prairie du Chien Treaty. That's in the books. That's another treaty. In that treaty, it says that the Dakota owned to the south side of the lake and the Ojibwe owned to the north side of the lake. Somehow, somewhere, I don't know what's going on with the lawyers and everything else, but Spirit Lake tried to get ownership of the lake, or at least half the lake, and that was thrown out of court. So there are many, many things that need to be corrected. And because you have a treaty, that settles things. There is no ands, if, or buts. When it says to this point, that's where you own. Now, I don't know how you guys lost the land base. I really don't. But at Spirit Lake, the points that are in the 1872 treaty, which says from the west end of the lake to the east end of the lake and then down to the Cheyenne River, that hasn't changed. So I just want you to keep all of these things in mind, that even though it's an old document, there's many, many things that have to be looked at. Hitch it to you, though.
Let me say something here about Louie. My stepdad was a white man. He lived with us for 45 years. He may have come to us as a white man, but he died of Dakota. And we always looked at him as a Dakota. Louie may talk about saying you guys and them, but we view him as a Dakota, not as a white man.
Thank you. I think we have some other speakers that are lined up too. I'd like to invite Mr. Hawkins to come on up, if you would share some words. And as he comes up, we also want to encourage any questions. We will send a microphone down if people would like to comment or say something, and we can bring the microphone down to you too. So that will be, and Vine Marks, if you would come up, we're hoping that you'll share a few words as well. Don't make me come get you. No, I will.
Okay, he's one of them. Good afternoon. My name's Russ Hawkins. I'd like to thank Rick Birch for inviting me here today to speak. I think he came into my office yesterday and asked to give a speech. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the BIA superintendent, and I'm a former chairman of our tribe. Served 5 consecutive terms in the early 80s to the early 90s. And I have an Indian name. My Indian name is Mazu Naji. Nobody ever asks me if I have an Indian name. All the different times as the chairman or someplace, they always put everybody else's Indian name up there, but they never put my name up there. So I'm just telling you now, that's my Indian name. It's Treaty Day today. Mazu Naji. I'm a direct line descendant from Mazu Naji, who fought against Sibley in the 1862 Minnesota War. He was shot, wounded, and captured, and he was scheduled to be hanged. And for whatever reason, he wasn't hanged. He was one of them that wasn't hanged, and he was put into prison in Davenport, Iowa. And while he was in prison, they kept him in chains. And I don't know if they kept everybody in chains or if they just kept him in chains. But they kept him in chains even inside the prison cell. And whenever the guards would come by, he would always stand up as an act of defiance with his chains, even though he was still chained. And he stayed in prison for about 6 or 7 years. And they released him. And when they released him, this is all oral history, and when they released him from prison, he had to promise he would never raise his hand against a white man again. And he made that promise, and at some point, he was on a train, and he had a suitcase, and inside the suitcase, he had a chicken. He was going to eat that chicken. That was going to be his lunch. And he opened that suitcase in front of all the Washichus, and that chicken got away, and everybody started laughing. And well, he was a pretty tough customer, and he didn't like people laughing at him. But he also knew that he promised he'd never raise his hand against another Washichu. So he caught his chicken, but when he brought it back, he had his suitcase, and he punched his fist right through the suitcase, both sides of the suitcase, and everybody stopped laughing. And so that was Mazu Naji, and he's buried up at Mayasa Church by Veblen, right in our row, and I'm a direct line descendant of him. And on that Indian buyback program that they recently had, I had a few acres, I had about almost 40 acres, and government offer was about like 3 or 4 times as much as I thought the land was worth. It was really tempting to sell it. But I thought Mazu Naji would probably come out of his grave and choke me with them chains if I sold it. So I didn't sell it. I kept it. But anyway, that's my Indian name, Mazu Naji. And as I've written some notes down here, so I stay focused. And I was a chairman back in the early 80s. I was the youngest chairman in the Great Plains, and now I'm the oldest superintendent in the Great Plains. But what I wanted to do is just mention briefly, this is Treaty Day. I want to talk just a little bit about it. And when I was chairman, I tangled with the federal government a few times. I got felony charges against me. You have a right to remain silent. You know the Miranda warnings. I got the entire tribal council facing felony charges also. But we talked about these things beforehand. And the council always supported me, and I always supported them. And when I was charged with felony charges, and our tribal council was, the first order of business was get the charges dropped against the council. And I remember Johnny Two Star was on council. Nobody knows probably Johnny Two Star. He was a World War II veteran, fought in Europe. He was he drove the Jeep for General Patton. And he was the first one. I said, you don't want to bring Johnny into this. I said, he's a World War II veteran. I said, General George Patton in Europe wanted the best sharpshooter in the country to drive his Jeep, and Johnny Two Star had that distinction. Johnny Two Star from Wool Agency, best sharpshooter in the whole outfit. That's who General Patton wanted to drive his Jeep. I said, you don't want to bring charges against him, drop him. So anyway, we did, but now what I want to stay focused. I'm not going to talk about the other times that I had the felony charges and how they resolved. But what I want to do, because this is Treaty Day, one of the battles that we had was Indian gaming. And it was about in the mid-80s, 1980s. And our tribe had about 85% unemployment. We had the highest infant mortality rate of any place in the nation. We had the shortest life expectancy of any place in the nation. We had 5 times the diabetes rate. We had twice the suicide rate. We had all the most deplorable statistics that tell you about the quality of life in a community. We had the most deplorable. And on top of that, we had 85% unemployment. And out of that unemployment, the state of South Dakota did not even count us in their unemployment statistics. I imagine we were such an embarrassment to the state. They didn't even want to mention us for fear of other businesses not wanting to come. I don't know what their thinking was, but they didn't include us in the unemployment. And so we needed employment, we needed jobs. We wanted to go with the casinos. We started a bingo hall with the Seminoles. They were the only ones who'd give us the time of day. No bank would loan us a penny. There was no benevolent funds out there for the asking. There's a Seminole tribe of Florida thousands of miles away. They said, we know what it's like to be a poor boy. We know what it's like. Sure, we'll help you. And they helped us, and they helped us with the bingo hall. But unfortunately, the bingo hall did not make the money we had hoped it would. We're not rich like Florida was. So bingo was big with them. It wasn't that big with us. So we had to either shut our doors or do something. So we decided to go into Class 3 gaming. That means slot machines, card games, etc. That was against the federal government and against the state of South Dakota. That time, U.S. Attorney was Phil Hogan, Phillips Avenue. He said, you've got to stop this. You cannot do this. I will arrest you. And about half the tribal council and myself and our attorney went down to meet with Phil, Mr. Hogan. And he said, you are violating Title 18 U.S. Code Service. You're violating the Organized Crime Control Act. You're violating Assimilative Crime Control Act. He said, did you order slot machines? And I said, yes, sir. He sure did. He said, how many did you order? And I said, 150. And he said, I can charge you with 5 felonies per machine. For every machine you ordered, I can charge you with 5 felonies. He said, first, you conspired to do an illegal activity. That's a felony. Then, did you do this in the mail? I said, yeah, we ordered them in the mail, and they're coming in. Well, then that's a second felony. You're using the mail for a felony activity. And then, did you receive these? I said, yeah, we received. Well, then you received them. That's another felony. Did you put them up in operation? And I said, yep. And he said, you're operating an illegal machine. That's another felony. And when you take the funds out of that, you're taking funds from an illegal machine. He said, so that's 5 felonies per each machine. And how many machines did you order? I said, 150. And he said, that 150 times 5, that is 750 felonies that I can charge with. Each felony is punishable by 5 years in prison. That is 3,750 years in prison. You must stop. Stop immediately, or I will prosecute you. So the counsel was quiet. Everybody was pretty quiet. Attorney was quiet. I told him there for a minute. He had me worried. I thought he was going to give me life. But what I did say is, I said, Mr. Hogan, do you have children? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, would you tell them to stop eating for 2 years? And he said, no, he wouldn't. Because he kept saying, stop and wait. Wait till the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act is passed in 1988. Then this will be legal. Then it will be okay. Then there won't be any charges against you. And I said, we're not going to wait till 1988. And he said, the state of South Dakota will approve it, and with the state of South Dakota, and together you both signing a compact, there will be no charges, there will be nothing illegal. Wait for the state of South Dakota. Wait 2 years. Wait. Don't do this. Don't make me arrest you. And I told him that we had a treaty. I'm bringing this back to Treaty Day. We have a treaty, and our treaty was signed in 1867. And the state of South Dakota was not a state until 1889, 22 years later. I said the state of South Dakota should be asking our permission if they can have gaming, not us asking them. And he just said, you've got to wait, or I'm going to have to bring charges against you. And at that time, we all have wonderful counsels we work with. I had a wonderful counsel, wonderful attorney. We beat him to the punch. We filed a suit against the federal government, and we laid that charge on him right there. It wasn't idle talk. It wasn't idle talk. One day we're going to sue you. I'm going to sue you if you do that. No, it was no talk. The law, the brief was prepared. It was signed. We just had to submit it, and we submitted it right there, Phillips Avenue, U.S. Attorney's Office, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Federal District Court. We said, we're filing a suit against you, federal government. We have a right to do this. We had a treaty in 1867. I said, Mr. Hogan, you took an oath of office that you're going to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Did you forget about Article 6? Article 6 of the Constitution says treaties are the supreme law of the land. I said, we're on trust land. We have this right. That is our position. And we filed that lawsuit. And he didn't really concede to anything, but what he did do is he didn't come and arrest us. It was to the point where our tribal council, our tribal treasurer, Arnie Ryan, rest in peace, Arnie Ryan, he died a few years back. Arnie had set aside $25,000 for my bail money. And he didn't know how much it was going to be. He didn't know if $25,000 would cover it. Arnie didn't want to come to the meeting. He said, ask him if $25,000 will cover your bail. And I asked the U.S. Attorney, we were really poor in those days. Our total assets was $250,000. That was it. End of the year, all bills paid, all FMHA lease payments paid, lights, utilities, propane. We had $250,000 on the table. That's all we had. And Arnie took 10% of that, $25,000. He told the council, I'm taking $25,000 out for Russell's bond. And the council didn't argue. And he said, but I don't know if that's going to be enough. Ask him. So I asked Mr. Hogan if the $25,000, I said, we're going to proceed with this. We're not backing down. We're not closing our doors. We're not waiting 2 years. We're going now. We had a treaty, 1867, Article 6, treaties are the supreme law of the land. That's got to stand for something. And we filed suit, and he said, no, there'll be no bond. You don't need to worry about that. You don't have to worry about that 25,000. We put that back. You don't need that. And so I won't go into the whole details. There was a lot of stuff that we did. He did tell us, he said, this is just the Organized Crime Control Act. I haven't even gotten to the RICO Act. I could charge you with a bunch more on the RICO Act. And I said, first, you will never convict us of the Organized Crime Control Act. Got all quiet. And I said, because there ain't nothing organized about us. I said, we change our mind on a daily basis, what we're going to do. And, but I did ask him, I said, what's the RICO Act? I was kind of curious. I knew what the Miranda warnings were because I got my Miranda warnings read to me. That's Ernesto Miranda. That's a totally different story about Ernesto and what he did, but that was against self-incrimination. But I didn't know what RICO did. I said, what did RICO do, that the RICO Act? Because we're not like the mafia. I thought he was an Italian mafia guy. I said, we're not like the Corleone family, or we're not like the Pizzini family, we're not like the Gambinis, we're a tribe. So what's this RICO Act? And he said, that's racketeering infiltrated into corporate offices. He said, how many on your council? At that time we had 15. He said, if there's more than 5 people, it was either 5 or 7, then we get five big families. Remember New York, crime families? If there's more than 5 entities, then we bring in the RICO Act. He said, but we haven't even brought in the RICO Act. But the long and short of it, we did some things. We did some legislative things, some really cool stuff legislatively. We fought fire with fire. We used the United States Constitution as our defense, Article 6. And when the smoke all cleared, we prevailed. Nobody went to prison. All charges were dropped. We were the only place between Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Las Vegas where you could bet $200 down on a card game. Everyone in Deadwood, $2 limit. I told them, I said, you got to respect the treaty. You got to respect our tribe. We're not like Farmer Brown out here in Hill City who just puts up a casino and gets 150 machines. We're a treaty ratified by Congress. I said, Article 6 of the Constitution says treaties are the supreme law of the land. And so I want to bring things into a conclusion now. And treaties, we can discuss them. We can have coffee and debate them. That's good. We can discuss them for academic purposes and sit in an ivory tower and talk about, do treaties really mean anything or do they not? What was everybody thinking way back then? If we could do that, that's good. We could write a book about it. But you can also take that treaty and put it on a table and say, back off, Mr. U.S. Attorney. We take care of our own business here. We'll see you in court. Article 6, treaties are the supreme law of the land. So with that, I just want to tell everyone here, especially young people, if anyone's listening, remember the treaties. Remember Article 6. Believe in the treaties. Believe in the treaties. Because if you don't, no one else will. Thank you.
Fantastic. Is it still on? Wow, what amazing words. I had the opportunity to listen to a land into trust court case, Supreme Court case. It was held down at University of South Dakota in their theater, and Mr. Hawkins was there. And I heard the attorney, the opposing attorney to Mr. Hawkins, claimed that she told the court that Mr. Hawkins was a multi-term tribal chairman, and that she asserted that he had just moved his office over to the BIA building. It was just a different office, but he still ran everything at the tribe. And she also reminded the court that this is the same tribal chairman during his tenure that had asserted authority over the cities of Beaver and another area. And, you know, it was really powerful. And if she hoped to evoke some negative feeling, like me and everybody else, every other tribal person there, we were like, wow, we were pretty happy about that. And of course, we won as Assistant Wahpeton. But yeah, that was, it's an amazing era to study the gaming, and I appreciate all of the information. You know, we have many of our former leaders that aren't here right now. We had hoped to talk to Itancha Mike Salvage. We had also, in the past, had Mr. Jerry Flute, and it was an honor to talk to him, as well as the attorney at the time, Mr. Bert Hirsch, and his work with ICWA. And it really helped me to truly understand, because something that you're saying, Russell, really makes sense to me, that I could, well, two things. First of all, number one, my grandfather always told me that no matter what you do, read, research, and he was looking at all my boxes of papers, he said, you can read all of this, but you'll never really know what went into a decision. That many of those decisions of people before us were based on survival, and you can't judge. And I think that that's really important, and that became, you know, a mental mantra to me when I work with history, because I don't understand what it was like to have the, like Mr. Hawkins just stated, 250,000 in total assets, or what it would be like to shut off income for families feeding children for 2 years, the importance of those things. And those things often don't show on paper. You know, we can look at our history, and this is an advocacy for the writing and sharing of our own history, and why this was really important. So again, I thank the council for wanting to do this and inviting others to come. When we had this event before, and the Itancha Renville just asked about how many times this had happened before, and I forgot to mention that what sort of revived this idea was, I had in the archives, I looked at a film, and this film was in a plastic container, and I looked at it, and it was not like in the film projectors. Just think, all of these kids have no idea what a film projector would be. Tick, 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 tick. And it was not in a film like that, but it was magnetic recording tape. And it was from the 70s, like 73 and 74. The first magnetic recording tape. It was before Beta, it's before VCR, and on it, the recording. So I had managed to find, researching, somebody that could transfer it to video. And when it is extinct format, that's incredibly hard to find somebody that can work with that media. And I found a place in North Dakota by the name of Makoche Studios, and they work with some of the North Dakota tribes to transfer old media. And one of them was the inauguration ceremony of Jerry Flute. The inauguration ceremony of Jerry Flute. And the second one was a moccasin game. It was a moccasin game from 1977. And in this black and white moccasin game, and I'll just tell a little bit about how when we first put the film up, and we put it up onto a screen, and everybody in my office was watching this, and it started, and we saw this moccasin game happening, and we were trying to recognize the people in the film. We could see a very young, let's see, there was, I think it was Frank King, I believe, and then also Danny, a very young Danny Seaboy. And some of the elders were speculating on where this would have been filmed. I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize anything through it. So we were all carefully examining every time the camera moved that, look, there's a wall there. Doesn't that look like? And all of this. And so we were trying to determine where this was. And we spent like an hour, looking at this tape and scrutinizing it. And then here, right at the end, it said filmed at the Sisseton Wahpeton Tribal Administration Building. So it told us at the end if we had just sped up. But for the film, the moccasin game that was happening, to see, like with this event, having Treaty Day at that time in the 1970s, the moccasin games that were happening, I believe, over in the council chambers or else over in the BIA building, I'm not sure, but it was one of those two buildings where this moccasin game was filmed. And I have to say that, Dave Seaboy, Danny Seaboy, I had the opportunity to travel with Dave Seaboy and some other relatives up to Canada during Winterfest and watch the moccasin game happening up there, and to see some of these old players and how incredible that was, and listen to some of the stories about moccasin as we traveled back. So some of the things, and of course, if you remember both Dave and Danny, the sense of humor, he was telling me, Tamara, you never marry a moccasin player. Don't ever marry a moccasin player. They'll throw you in the game, he used to say. And the other thing was his niece was along with me, and she kind of bumped me and said, let's go. She said, they're losing. They're going to blame it on us. She said, so we had to walk away from the moccasin game. But some of those stories and that history, and of course, people, some of our older folks know, like my grandma one time telling me when I was a child, my grandpa Richard Keeble was going to play moccasin up in Canada, and she said, well, he better not lose the car. Like those things were very real, the days and days of playing and some of the great stories associated with it. And I'll say one, Dave Seaboy had talked about how a man, I believe his last name was LaBelle, and this is quite a ways back, and how he said that there was a moccasin game happening, he told me, at Moses St. John's place, and it was down in an area where you couldn't see, it was kind of protected, he said, so they used to play down there because the agents, of course, would shut down a game if they saw it. And so they were playing, and he was supposed to go home. He had been to town, and he had with him wood, and he had bought everything for his wife's chicken coop. And he said that he was traveling on home, and as he came to an intersection, there were these two young men that stopped him, and they were tasked with going to get cigarettes for this moccasin game that had been going on for a long time. And these boys were really excited, and they told him, hey, it's a great game, you better come, you need to come down there. And he said, I knew that. He said it sounded like it was really an intense game, and he said, I knew I was supposed to go the other direction and go home. I thought about it, and this man had decided that he was going to go to the game. So long story short, he had apparently lost everything. He lost not only the wood and things for the chicken coop, but he also lost the wagon and the horse and lost everything. And so, of course, Mr. Seaboy's jokes about it, he said, so we'd see him around town, and he was staying with relatives, so apparently he lost his wife and everything. And I know that, with these stories, it gets really exaggerated when it becomes a good story. But some of those stories about those games of old were really pretty interesting. And so now to see, that we still have these things, we still have our culture, we have our, our ways, these things are important, and how when you see young people up there that are learning to play or beating our elders, that's probably what's happening up there, or else learning our history and trying to understand our treaties, those things are really important. But we did say that we would like to have some input from others. There's other people here that I think would be great to hear from. Would we be able to take the microphone down? Brandon will bring the microphone down if anybody would like to share something or maybe even ask a question. Okay, great. Okay, while he's doing this, I'm going to try to tell a joke. Now, I don't do this very often, but I'm going to tell you. I was up in Canada. Oh, come on now, Eric, I can do this. I was up in Canada, in Edmonton, Canada. They were hosting an event on missing children and unmarked burials. a very serious subject. And we had been there. I'd been there for a few days, and I was there to talk about Carlisle. And one of the older men there, he told this joke. And he said that this woman had told him how her Takoja wanted to know how her mom and dad had met. And he asked her, he said, he wanted to know more about his family and where he came from. And he said that she told him, she said, that when his mother was young, she was very beautiful, and that she had invested a lot in her daughter, taught her how to be a good Dakota woman. She could sew, she could speak, she told stories, she could dance, all of these things. She was very beautiful. And they had attended this gathering. They attended a big gathering. There were many other tribes and stuff coming to this gathering. And she thought her daughter was old enough now to find a husband. And so she was watching carefully in the crowd. And she said that there was a young man. She saw him across the way. He was dressed very nice, handsome young Dakota man. And she thought that he would be a wonderful son-in-law. She was already imagining what her grandchildren would look like. And she's telling her grandson this. And she said that he came over, this young man came over and asked her daughter to dance. And they went out to the center and they danced together, and she was just pleased. She was so pleased. They looked like a great couple. And as they were coming around, she said they came in front of her, and she said she got that love medicine ready. She said, I lifted it, she said, and as they danced by, she said, when the young man turned towards her, she said, and I blew it, she said, Annie Chun, your father got in the way, she said. It's one of my favorite stories. But okay, Brandon, do you have the microphone? Okay.
What am I going to do with said microphone?
Or anybody want to speak?
Storytell, speak,
Yep.
talk about politics, culture,
Ask any question of
issues.
people here.
attack
Yeah.
tribal council. I'm here.
This is not tribal council.
Oh,
This is a
okay, I'll just
gathering for history, so.
Yes, Tim Labatt from Peaver, Biculi District, Dakota, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. A lot of times when I hear today, and I think we, as a people and as our future generations, we sell ourselves short. What I see a lot is this and I'm going to label it. I don't like doing labels, but it's pretty much fits, this contemporary Indianism. We're not contemporary people. We're traditional, we're Yahana, we're from way back. And we're from Minnesota. We're not from northeast South Dakota. Gabriel Renville made sure we had a place to go after the uprising. But my thinking, and I think it's a part of the way we flowed through history, and Congress, the Senate, presidents have all recognized us as being Plains or Native American people. And I think that's where I look today at being that Native American Plains person. I also look at where our history began. Now, we can go all over the mere acres we have now up in northeast South Dakota and here into North Dakota. But how about all the 26 million acres we vacated in Minnesota by the Traverse des Sioux Treaty of 1858? Our history, to be true and exact, should go back to, it's always been my point, should go back to the 1858 Traverse des Sioux Treaty. Because in the long run, it's not going to be who was on council, who was a superintendent, or who was just a regular person. It's going to be about the flow of things, where we came from as a people, ancient people. And the ancientism is from Minnesota. We followed the 1867 treaty by the 1851, and 1858, I should say, Traverse des Sioux, and all those chiefs back there. And there's historical fact. Most historians, they won't get deranged by telling it one way. They'll actually meet together, and a lot of them have various degrees from different places, but they'll find out and they'll get to the point of where we as a people were. how we transcended to here, what our language was, what our dealings with Anishinaabe were in the early 1800s. That viewpoint where I'm saying we sell ourselves short is my meaning. We need to go way back in our history. We need to trend way back to where we are today. Not the people, not the individual Indianism, but the flow of us as a tribe, and a large tribe at that time, very large, much larger than we are. And we need to look at those steps that allowed us to be this smaller tribe with smaller acreage, because that's power. That knowledge is power to future generations. Those presidents, those Senate, those Congress react highly when they say, well, you lost 26 million acres unjustly, treaties that went sideways. And that's power. That's something in our collection of bargaining for future generations. It's not who is who today. It's that holding of the history. And our history, as my dad used to say, is oral. It's all oral. I said, Dad, what the oldest person that you've talked to in your lifetime? And he said, that would have to be probably my grandpa. He came from 1851 prior, and just as a boy, he knew what the uprising was about, and so did his grandma, a Labatt and a Renville. And they told about, they get the feeling of the hard time being imprisoned and the walk and so forth. And kids are resilient, we all know that, so they try better. They come up from what they're downward at holding is, and they rise from it. But if he certainly can get a flavor of life in the 1850s, we should be able certainly to this day have holding of what the 1850s to the early 1800s were about in Minnesota. Right now, I feel in some ways it's Dakota, Assistant Wahpeton, Midwakata. We're a big mixture here. We sell ourselves short, and we don't have those holdings in inventory. We need to get that holding in inventory. We need to get those historical facts and data on board so our children's generations has that power. And that power is knowledge. And that power is not lost. It's out there. It's in the Minnesota by different historians in Minnesota. Not necessarily the natives. You have to go to the non-historians. And there was a lot of different, like it or not, but there's a lot of different missionaries, Father Hennepin, and all that of those times that knew that prior to Minneapolis being born, where we were on the banks of Minnesota, Mendota. And that has to be told because, that's power down in Minneapolis. You mean this stadium, or this is just a stone's throw where the original Dakota people can trace back to? We need that firepower. And we need that for our continued generations. But that's what I think with the right minds and the way technology is, we can get those holdings. Or, like that, let's find somebody who can get them for us. But that knowledge is definitely power for the future. It's a power if we're to become a true sovereign nation, it's a power no different from what the Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, what's going on in Russia today, asking for lands we once held back, or at least getting something in kind return. With the United States government, it's never too late to go back to ask for more reparations for 27 million acres lost. That's where I feel today we sell ourselves short. And really, to be Dakota Ahana and speak with that sovereignty. Your sovereignty isn't here. Your sovereignty is over in Minnesota. We gained sovereignty here by what happened over in Minnesota, good or bad, and by different treaties. So I think we as a Dakota nation, part of the Sitawang Wahpeton, we owe it to our future generations to gather that knowledge and to put it into a various format where the kids, they can get on a phone at 6 years old. They can easily scramble apart, Google, find search engines to find all this information. As far back as they study anything else, as they study Europe invasion of the United States, we should be able to get that in our holding. Thank you.
Amitakiopi, Catherine Akipa, Mia. Inawaya Blossom, Dr. Blossom, Kibo, Echiapi, Atewaya, Woodrow Keeble, Woodrow Wilson Keeble, Kushiwaya, Evelyn Crawford, Unkawaya, Samuel Crawford Agency, Oshpayataha. I want to welcome our relatives up there from Spirit Lake, and just say that we are very glad that you could come and share with us today your perspectives and your jokes and all of that. You know, I was always taught that we're one people, us guys and you guys up there. And that way before all the borders and boundaries, we always had our place to camp up there. And my grandma, she's Sisitwa, and my unkana, he's Bedewakantu. And Wachbetwa, my Atewuri is Wachbetwa. And so I just want to say that I have a little bit to share on Russell's name. He didn't know when he was getting that name as a young man, he didn't know that was going to kind of be a prophecy of his life. Mazu Naji. And the translations go to that name are according to standing up, clothed in chains, or rises up from chains, being clothed in chains. And so he didn't know that the treaties and the history of the treaties got our unkana, Mazu Naji, his English, Chaje was Frenier. Forgot. No, went blank for a minute. But that's my grandma's grandpa. And he raised her. And her grandma Josephine raised her because she was Wambadenicha. Her mother died in 1897, a year after she was born. So my grandma, Evelyn, she was raised by the culture of the 1850s. And so we knew that culture in our family very strongly. And we, you know, even in the grandchildren, we had to practice that because now I'm like 70, and so we're in that generation, Misu and me over there, and Misu over there and me. We're getting gone now. So, but I wanted to say about that was a prophecy of his name too, because then he didn't know that future, as the youngest chairman of the United States at 26 years old, longest running chairman for the that he would be facing the federal government. And they came at him with witness after witness after witness in the federal government about how many laws he broke and how felon he would be if he got convicted. And he would just spend half of his spirit life, I guess, in a federal prison. But anyway, so all of that just dropped and fell. At some point, it just was it all came to naught. And guess what? Okay, that was that treaty that saved him. And one thing that his friend, Jim Billy of the Seminole people, told him, he said, Russell, he said, we don't know this. A lot of us tribes don't know this, but he said, as a tribal entity like that, a treaty tribe, he said, our sovereignty is like a muscle. He said, if you don't exercise it, you're not going to see the strength and the power of it. And so it came to the table that day where he was standing with all that in front of him, took a step, and he said, I exercise my tribal sovereignty as a sovereign treaty nation, and you should have come to us for that permission instead. And so that name fulfilled itself on his life as well. And so I was going to say about our grandpa, when they sent him down, they didn't hang him. He was one of those extra ones that got sent down to prison. They barged him down to Davenport, Iowa. Well, he spent 5 years in prison there, finally let him out. And then afterwards, they didn't just let him go on the prairies or up to the woodlands or up to the hills. No, they just had to keep track of him. And so what they did is they offered him, this is before there was a town of Houston, before there was highways and roads, and there was Fort Abercrombie, and then there was Fort Siston and Fort Snelling out there. And they said, Mr. Frenier, they said, do you want to get a job? And he said, doing what? And they said, we need somebody to drive wagon from, take goods from Fort to Abercrombie up to Fort Wadsworth. And he said, yeah, sure, yeah. And he thought about it, and before he gave that answer, he said, you know, I think I will do that. There's some good things about the Army that I experienced. And he said, I will take position. So he did, and he began to drive those wagons from Fort Snelling, taking goods from there to Abercrombie and Fort Wadsworth. They had a cabin up in Big Coulee, up in Miocene. And so one time somebody asked him, they said, how could you just go and turn around and work for that government that was trying to hang you and had you in prison and stuff? And he sat and he's just smiling for a long time. He goes, well, he said, they got good beans, he said. And so that's the reason why he took a job with the U.S. Army doing that, because they had good beans, he said. After that, my grandma Evelyn, when she was raising us and all the grandkids are out there and stuff, she said, yeah, anytime somebody likes beans, oh, he must be a grandson of Mazu Naji. Anyway, hamitakapi.
Naji did that. Are you long-winded, sir? Yeah.
I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jacob Demars. Dakota name is Wakia Yuhamani. Walks with Lightning. Recently, I was elected as Crow Hill District Representative up in Spirit Lake, or as in Louie's story, Kaka Hill. I better be careful here. We got KJ's nephews are Crow. But anyways, going back to Dr. Lanji's talking about kind of like some of the curriculum and learning about some of the treaties and I grew up in Mayville, which is in between Grand Forks and Fargo. My mother, Dawn DeMars, moved there for college. So I didn't grow up around the reservation at all. And I didn't move back until I was 18. So I'm fairly new to the politics, to some of the tribal ways, and our culture, especially our culture. Being 18, first being introduced to sweats, ceremonies, coming around for powwows and stuff. The problem, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, is the curriculum that's brought up for people who are not on the reservation. I didn't learn any of it. I learned about treaties, I learned about the ways that the U.S. government and how it came about, but there is no Dakota history in that curriculum. And that is something that, are we here? Hello? Okay, that's something that I am hoping we can push for up on Spirit Lake, and hopefully get some help here as well. That's going to be a long-term thing. I do know recently in North Dakota, as far as colleges, they started recognizing our curriculum in colleges and transferring over our credits that we learned from tribal colleges as well. One of the people that I learned about our treaty was Vern Lambert Sr. He taught our tribal sovereignty class, and Lorraine Graybear for our language class. And Vern is gone now, and the new generation's coming up. I always tease the tribal council up there, 90s babies are in now, because I'm only 31, born in 91, and I don't see a lot of people pushing forward my age trying to learn our tribal sovereignty as much. And I'm not sure, as far as Four Winds, our school up there and their curriculum teaching this. And as much as I've known, just by the last 10 years or so, there could be a major push, and we could start understanding these treaties and pushing in the court systems, like former chair had said, and reclaiming a lot of our stuff and the way that we move forward. But just a couple of things I wanted to share. I haven't really formally got to talk to Mr. Garcia on a lot of his stories. I'm hoping to get a little more to the table, because that transfer of history needs to be done. And there's not a whole lot of youth in this room as well. And I'm hoping that the younger generation below me can start understanding this, and we can start using it to our advantage as well. Thank you.
Good. What time is it? Oh, good afternoon. My name is KJ Graywater. I'm the. Came in after. Oh, okay. I took over for Dr. Eric Longe as the THPO for Spirit Lake. I've been in that position for a little over a year now, and it's very overwhelming to just be part of meetings like this and the other meetings that we go to on a weekly and monthly basis with all these other government agencies, and it's really eye-opening, because I spent most of my adult life after high school. I left the reservation like a month and a half after I graduated, went into the United States Marine Corps for 4 years, and then from there went back home. I think I tried to help out as much as I could, kind of burn out pretty quick. Got into hanging out with my friends too much, and decided that I needed to go do construction work because I needed to keep myself busy. So I got into wind turbines for 5 years, and I learned a lot of the way big corporations and businesses are run outside of the reservation, and the planning that goes in is key for big businesses when they're making sure that they don't fizzle out and disappear. And I believe that some of that has to transfer over into how we do things as tribal governments and getting our young people involved. They're the ones that are going to be fighting all these fights a lot sooner than they think, because 20 years ago, I didn't think I was going to be a 40-year-old guy standing and talking to everybody about historic preservation or the treaty and and how important all of this is. And it's extremely important because the government is, from my understanding and from what I experienced and the education that's out there, is they're just waiting for a day where they could say they don't care about it anymore, so let's just write them off and that'll be it. And it's not going to be that quick, but it'll be something similar to that, I believe, if we don't get our young people involved even more than what they are. But I think the needle is moving in the right direction because of events like this happening. I don't remember as many events like this when I was young, and I was usually probably doing other things. So it's really, I believe it's important. And the fact that we're able to come down here from Spirit Lake and be so welcomed, I really appreciate that from everyone here, because I've come down here, I think 3 times now, and every single time I feel like I'm being with other relatives, even though I haven't grown up with anyone here. But it's always been a really good feeling, and I really believe that we need to support each other all the way into Canada, because a couple weeks ago I was here, and there was a man talking about if all the Oyate came together, we would have over 1 million people in our one group. And I think the government knows that keeping us separated and keeping us kind of fighting over whatever little scraps they give us is their way of making sure that they stay in control and in power. And we do need a lot of people to step up in leadership roles to be willing to go to prison sometimes. It's could be scary, and we need strong leadership that's willing to do that and use the treaty to our advantage, because that's what it's there for. And that's really all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Vine, would you like to say some words? Run.
Help me talk up here. I don't know any good jokes to tell you, but if you look at me, I'm the best looking joke around, I guess. But anyway, what I want to talk about is everybody's talking about Dakota stuff here, talking about the treaty and how the Wachita people took our land away. And every year we go to have different meetings like this, and I've been out west a lot of times and went to some Wichita natures out there. And that's we also talk about that out there also, how the government wrote treaties and then they break all the treaties that they've written with the Dakota people. And it's something that people are always talking about, and that's one of the subjects here also. I don't have any education. I never even finished high school, but I know that there's a lot of our tribal people that have college degrees, and whatever their degrees are in, they should make use of them in helping our tribe. But my thing is today, I used to work with a tribal historic preservation office. And I did a lot of work with them, and I've been all over the 6 or 7 state area and doing stuff. And lately, I've been working with the tribe, 2 tribal organizations, and that's with the language program. And right now, I'm very interested in the language program because I teach the language program over with the tribe. And college also has a language program which I work with over there. And the young people that I'm working with over there are becoming very fluent speakers. And but every class that we have, they're still asking us questions, and there's only a few of us in there that grew up with the language, and so there's a lot of words and different sentences or whatever you use in the language. And one word, means when you use one word one way, it means something, and if you use the word another way, it means something else. And that's another thing that we're trying to explain to all of our language learners, that just because you hear a word, and one of the words that I always use as an example is enaji, and there was a lady sitting across the room over there, and I told her enaji. So she got up, and I said, Detske. So she came towards me, and then I said, enaji, and she stopped. And that's just an example of the words, the many different meanings that our Dakota words have. The word enaji means stop, and the word enaji also means get up. And there's other words that have multiple meanings in them. And my thing has been for the last couple of years now, since I've been working with the language program, is that we need to have our young people. There are a lot of young people today that are learning the language, and the language needs to be preserved. It needs to be taught to our young people, and without knowing the language, you're not even a Dakota. And that's the way I feel about the language. And I think that all the other things, there are people working on the treaties and working on the borders and all this other stuff, and those are all important things also. But I think our language also is important. And then our young people, if they're going around and going to the powwows and stuff, and they're not fully Dakota. You need to learn and speak your language, and you can express yourself a lot better when you're speaking Dakota. And we're using the language. Once you learn the language, it's a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun speaking, and that's the way our language classes are. And the young people that are in our classes now, we sit in there and talk and tease and joke each other, and they're becoming pretty fluent speakers. I'm not the most fluent speaker around. I didn't grow up speaking Dakota. My parents both went to the boarding schools, were sent to boarding schools, and they were punished for speaking the language. And so my parents told me that I needed to speak Washichu, learn all the English I could, because that's the way the world was going to be. But they themselves always spoke Dakota in my home, and so I grew up hearing the language, and I retained that. And so I can speak not fluently, but I speak pretty good enough where I can carry on a conversation with everybody in our classrooms. And that's kind of my whole thing about other things are important. The borders and all these other things are also important, and people specialize in that, and things like that. Different lawyers specialize in different things, and engineers specialize in different things. But I think we need to also remember that we need to retain our language and teach our young people our language. If you don't know the language, don't need quote up tishne, and that's the only thing that I kind of wanted to just say that, and I don't have that much really to say. I know Tamara kind of wanted me to tell some stories and stuff, and and that's kind of what we usually do in our classrooms too. And we have little Hotunkaka stories that we go around, and there's a lot of things within those Hotunkaka stories also, and the people need to learn them and hear them, because there are lessons within them. And so that's just the only thing that I wanted to say here for now, that everything is important here too also, but I think to me our language is also important, and we need to not forget that, and all our young people need to learn to speak our language. And you need to be Dakota, and when you go you can't go to some big meeting somewhere and say I'm a Dakota and then come back over here and just act like a Washichu among your own people. The Dakota Bichoe or Kitamilano. That's important. To me, it's the most important part, today. And everything else is also important too. But if we're going to remain Dakotas, we need to speak Dakota also. How Hanana Pekta, Hamo Pepsi.
Thanks, bud. Anyone else?
O me takia, o pteria ke takun I woha da ke wachin. Taku I woha da ke wachin kin he, woa pe ehana yusuta pe kin he, I woha da ke wachin. Ho, (1863-62), he han. O ia te o ki toa piki, he un taha piki, he o ki chize o iuhape. Naha, ata tako o ase, tako ota, te khia o kaki papi. Toka o ia te ki te khia on kurape. Shichecha ki hina wichaktepe. Wichicha na ki hina te khia wichakwape. Hokshina ki hina uge ktepe. Ea o ia te ki te khira tako ota un kaki pape. Ho okichi se ki ta woa pi yusuta pi ki head ihuni pi 1867. Woa pi yusuta pi ki he del oape. Woa pi ki. Naha, wichacha je ki hina ihukaya. Iahope. Heina itanchape. Oyata ki hina kakhinchape. Ho T62 wa piki de yusuta piki he Yoha kab he 1868 naha 70-71 he na taku na shini. He toka he ya iyuha itancha unkitho piki he na chaje ki he yahopi. Tako na tokchas. Apeto ki de haya wana. 1868 alpe. Utaku e pia. O cheti shakoi o yateki. Woapi yusuta piki hena yuhape. Apetu ki le tokata kia o cheti shakoe ki wita pinaha. Woapi ki yusuta piki hena yuhai najib naha. Ake o cheti shakoe he iechir o piunchepe o koki hipe. Hekta kia. Ina wayaki ni u echuha. Ia boslad oyanke ki hechi un kipe. Mini o government ki he. He un hechi oyate ki wita pe. O hechi un kipe on ka inawa ki delia ke he o chahareske hechi oyanka pe. Inawa ki okshaksha etua. Ampetu kinde o cheti shakoe ki wita piki wabdake iyo mukpi hechel umakiake naha awabde se unka he yechitu. The treaties that we have, the treaty that we have that needs to be recognized as the only treaty that we have is this one, 1867. The reason why I say that is that all the names, they put their name or their X on there. He Hakab, 1868. Tonkanshinamayaki. Kanriduta. He chajeki he. He didn't put his X on this other one when it was changed. Woyakapi, ehana woyakapi echiata, unkita. Wotaku in the talking. He iwohadakapi. Kanriduta ki. Tokanshina tipi hechi iape. He wopi yusuta piki he 1867 ki he wichada. O hechi tokanshina tipi hechi ipi naha yu tokchapi. Yu tokchapi ki naha Kanriduta ki he wichadashni. Wichadashni naha he wopi blutan wa chishni eye. Unka watohan. Wakba ichahada head. Tue ois tue piki ktepi. He ktepi. 1868 treaty ki he wope you tanchishni he ktepe toket ked head sturwaki tunkanshina wichwaki wohada kape humakshina he ha henana wakho Henana wakhud ha. Waton chantem ha shiche. Chinche mutako happy. Techia on crew up. He na iwo da kapi che. 1862 he tang. In the time when my grandpa Kareduta, he signed the treaty here. He agreed with the 1867 treaty. He signed it. He put his mark there. Then they were asked to go to Washington, D.C. He also went there because he was one of the signers. When they read the U.S. copy, they translated this treaty and it was changed. It was changed, and Henri Duta did not agree with the treaty when it was changed. He did not want to sign. A time came when they found him, as my Tonjon mentioned, that they said that he committed suicide. But from our family history, we know what happened there because it was handed on. Some of the things that I know that I heard from my grandparents and my grandmas, I don't want to mention it now, but we need to understand that this 1867 with all the original signers, that's the one we go under. And if all Oheti Shakoi Oyate bring their treaties together, we will be the most powerful nation in this world that stands against United States of America. Oma koche kinde tokia ya ipi sta Dakota oyatiki washaka piheche waunyakapi. No matter where we go in this world, you will meet people and they will say, "Are you Sioux?" And we'll say, "Yes." They know you, but we know ourselves as Dakota or Ocheti Shakoi. So that's how great we are. My mama and I went to Standing Rock. We sat in the big circle, flags down this path here from all Indian nations. We were sitting there in this circle and she looked around and she said, "Son," she said, "I have lived to see the Ocheti Shakoi come into one camp. I have lived to see that," she said. I was really thinking about that, and that was true, because all 7 council fires were there. They had different camps. That's how, it's a good analogy to take each treaty that we have. Heched na unji pinaha. We can go go against this government. We've always been against this government. Some have conformed, but those who are true Ocheti Shakui, we have not. Before it was mentioned, my uncle, Louie Garcia, he was married to my auntie. When he married my auntie, in our Dakota way, when she married him, he became one of the Ocheti Shakoi Oyate. So Hechet Mitakiab, Wopira Echichiape for coming together here. But always remember, 1867, where every one of our leaders signed that. That's the one that means the most. Not the one where they said Grandpa's name is there and it says deceased. Not that one. Oh, hey, Chitudo, Mitakuye, Oasin, Wopira, Edo.
Hampadamia. Hamatakiapi, Manchapi, Wachakpi, Tokjawi, Miniwaka, Oyate, Himata. Want to say Padamia to Tamra for hosting this, and I think you invited my father here, but he was unable to come, Mr. Oliver Gord, Sr., and I'm coming from the Merrick and Jackson and Gord families up in Spirit Lake. And I know my father did a lot of work in a couple of walks back in the day, because the sign at Spirit Lake, or Welcome to Devil's Lake Sioux Tribe, it used to be like further and further into town, and so he would organize walks to commemorate where the original boundaries were. And then he also did some work in changing the name of our tribe to Miniwaka Oyate too, instead of Devil's Lake Sioux Tribe. And so I come from a family that probably advocates for treaty rights. It's probably ingrained in me. And I did some work with Tamra with the North Dakota Native Tourism Alliance. We formed that nonprofit with the 5 tribes of North Dakota. And one of the main reasons why we formed that nonprofit was because a lot of the Washichus were telling our history on their terms and not on our own terms. So the main mission of that nonprofit is to tell our own stories on our own terms. And so I'm very grateful that Tamra does advocacy work like that and continues to also educate non-natives. One of my primary passions has been working within peacemaking courts. I helped establish a Wodakota traditional court with tribal elders within our court system. And what we did was we seen the first-time youth offenders. Instead of sending them to the judge, they went to see a group of our elders from our tribe. Mr. Demas McDonald passed on, Aloysius Cloud, Peter Belgard, my dad, Oliver Gord, Anna Little Ghost. We're just a couple of those elders that was able to sit around and talk to these youth offenders and set them on a better path and talk to them about who their family is, talk to them in Dakota, sing them songs, smudge and pray with them. And so it was a really good way to, I think, assert some of our our treaty rights, because we can make our own laws and we can make our own codes, and we were able to insert some of the language too within our tribal codes. And my dad put a Dakota prayer within our tribal court code too during that time. And so that's some of the work that I do. I'm going to be going to Prairie Island and helping them, our Dakota relatives over there. They're going to try to establish a peacemaking court with some child custody and probate cases handle amongst their own members instead of going through the court system there. Some of the other work that I do is I'm a member of the Indigenous Parent Committee over there in Bismarck. That's where I live currently, and I lived there for about 5 years now. And we're always fighting with the administration to advocate for cultural programming for our youth over there. And we currently filed a grievance against the superintendent over there because he really he yelled at us as our parent group, and he told us that we're silenced, basically, but we're fighting back, and we're like, no, you can't silence us. It's a federal requirement to have a parent group. So we're gonna. That's another fight for another day. But that's what I'm currently working on. I'm also here as working under the USD Rural Business Development Grant, and so I'm here offering free technical assistance to tribes and Native entrepreneurs and any Natives that want to start nonprofits. I've done nonprofit development and studied business, so I'm here to offer that service too. So just kind of wanted to say a couple words. I know I told Tamara that I was going to talk a little bit, so thank you, Padamia, to everyone for hosting this, and Padamia for welcoming us from Spirit Lake. Yes.
Does anyone else like to say something? Tamara? Grady? They're pointing at you.
This is not my blind man's cane. I was going in and out. I wasn't being disrespectful to any of you speakers, but my team was playing up there. So this is my hitting stick. Kind of good to carry around in case any of you guys get hostile. I can, boom. Anyway, Tamara was talking about Moxon earlier, and there's a little phrase we have. They call it 2 in a brew. You ever heard that? When you have double elimination, you play 2 games and you're out. So then you go have a brew. See, that's part of our culture that we don't talk about, you know. 2 in a brew. Anyways, I have a lot of things I would like to talk about. I think the first thing I should mention is that when I was growing up, I was born in 1943, so in a couple of months I'll be 80 years old. And I was growing up in the 40s and 50s in Siston. Our culture was almost dead. I was telling people that I went to school on the Rosebud Reservation, and as traditional as you would think that reservation would be, nobody had a hand drum. None of those boys I went to school with talked Indian. Culture was almost dead. So, I don't know much about our history. My dad was fluent, and he was a fairly cultural guy. He used to have powwow music way back in the 50s. Drive us nuts, you know. In the middle of the night, he'd be playing powwow music, and when we were trying to sleep upstairs. And I didn't really take an interest in our culture until about 2000. I really didn't know that we came from Minnesota. I knew, I guess, vaguely that my great-grandfather, Chief Gabriel Renville, was one of the principal signers of the 1867 treaty. I certainly didn't know nothing about the Scouts, as some of you history buffs. That after the midday of Wakantawas started the war, and if you don't believe me, read the opening preamble to the treaty. 3 or 4 lines down, it blames the midday Wakantawas. They're the reason that we got kicked out of Minnesota. They're the reason there's Spirit Lake and the Assistant Reservation. Anyway, I started to study our history and culture. And unfortunately, I did because I had a business in town and a tribal council, we used to have a blog. Mike Roberts had the blog, and somebody referred to our tribal council as tribal council. So I kind of used that term liberally over the years. I haven't said that yet to the new council. Of course, that's my sonny boy up there, so I'll have to kind of maybe hold off for a couple years. But anyway, as I said, tribal councils messed with my business, so I took an interest in our history. I learned as much as I could about the history and the culture. And one of the interesting things was I discovered that after the war, they rounded up and sent most of the Dakotas to, well, not most of them, about 600 of them, I forgot the number, to Davenport, Iowa. And of course, 1,600 Sissetons and Waptons were rounded up and herded to Fort Snelling, where they were incarcerated during the fall and the winter of 1862 and 63. Well, anyway, my grandfather Gabriel, for whatever reason, he went to see General Sibley and he volunteered to be a scout. Consequently, I believe it was 36 or 37 half-breeds and full-bloods were scouts. As a result, because of their service, the government granted us this reservation and Spirit Lake. And, you know, I've had Indians criticize them, the scouts, for being sellouts, scouting for the white man. And I've heard other Indians say that my grandfather Gabriel wasn't a real Indian, a real chief. So I studied all that stuff. What was a chief back then? If you look, there's maps that show all of the villages along Minnesota River. And my opinion is those chiefs were just leaders of that particular village. In other words, they're equivalent to mayors. So, in that regard, Gabriel, and that's the other thing he was criticized for, was the white man appointed him. The Indian agents appointed him. So he's not a real chief. Well, anyway, he served, whatever you want to call him, spokesman, whatever. He served in that capacity for 27 years. And
You look at, most of you I'm sure know our history. 1867, they give us 918,000 acres. 20 years later, can you imagine that? 20 years later, they were knocking on our doorstep for that surplus land, 660,000 acres. So we lost it. Well, of course, the sneaky white man, he didn't just come and steal it. He had to create what they called the Dawes Act, which proposed to give each Indian 160 acres, and then the surplus will be sold. And this is kind of, one of the debates. It depends on what you think or what you know. But Gabriel, I always thought that he was against it, selling the land, opening the land up. But he was also a scout, and that was the other big factor, was they wanted that scout pay. And so the government promised to pay him scout pay. And one of the interesting things I found out, even though Gabriel was against the treaty, you look at the treaty, I think there was 211 Dakotas who signed that treaty, 211 or 204. Anyway, guess what? My grandfather, Moses Renville, his name was on there. So you wonder, well, Chief's against the treaty, Chief Gabriel, why did he allow his son to sign? And it goes back to the Indian has always been land rich. I think this whole country is, 2-3 billion acres of land? But we may have been land rich, but we were money poor. And I think that was the motivation, ultimate motivation for the Indians, the 200 and some of them who signed the treaty or who agreed to sell the land, is because they were broke. So here we are, 6 acres or years? 156 years later. And generally, we're still broke in the real sense. I was involved in a federal land question here a year or two ago. There was a considerable sum of money involved. And here the judge, Cornman from Aberdeen, in one of his opinions, he was criticizing me for making money. And I've been in a lot of places, almost every place in America, and you look at all the beautiful homes, businesses that the Washichus have. And here we are, generally on the bottom of the economic shit heap in America. And that's what, we can't do anything about the past. We can talk about it, write about it, debate about it, but we can't change it. So, our challenge tomorrow and the days after is to improve our economic situation. And there's numerous ways to do that. One of them that my son Travis has been proposing, he worked for the Navajos. And see, Indian tribes, because of our sovereignty, we have the same authority as Blue Cross Blue Shield. We should be able to start our own, what they call medical care organizations. In other words, Blue Cross Blue Shield getting that money, us Indians, we all get together and we collect that. And this is a multi-million-dollar business. We just got to get past
this little, I don't know, guess you'd call it Nawizi, jealousy of each other, you know. Let's forget that for a while. And I think this new council, I talked to Curtis up there. I think we're, and Gypsy here, I think we turn a corner. Turn the corner. They're pretty much right now all on the same page. Let's forget all of our petty jealousies. Let's move forward in a good way. Okay, that's it. I'll tell you a joke, but I'll let her go at that. Tate oh, that's her name. Did you know that? That means windy woman.
There we go.
Brandon,
Yeah. Hello? Yeah, that is not really my name. Ooh. Let's see. Let me shut this. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit because we've had some things happening. Like my colleague KJ mentioned, that our Spirit Lake relatives have been here recently. We've been together for our children, the two boys that are at Carlisle. And a little bit of background on it, and we've tried to do a great deal of educating and sharing public information on this issue. The Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate had worked for many years. Myself, the THBO office, had worked on the issue with Carlisle in trying to, first of all, get through the regulations, policy, and trying to understand what it would take to bring our children home. At Carlisle Cemetery, there are two boys and they are known to be Sisituan. It is Amos Laframboise and Edward Upright. And so about 6 years ago, in working with Rosebud and Arapaho in the repatriation of their children, bringing their children home, we set out to do the same thing for those boys. But what we found happening, both with Rosebud and every other tribe that has worked with this before, is that it is an active military base at Carlisle. It is an active military base, and so the Department of the Defense, they assert their military policy over our children buried there. Essentially, they're treating our children like any servicemen, and they will have the next of kin authorize disinterment, and then they do the transfer ceremony over to that next of kin. And they're doing what, you know, it has been done many, many, many times past. But for us, this is a different issue. And I know that, you know, everybody has shared the same feelings. Our children are not servicemen. Our children arrived there in 1879. And just a little bit of background, because there's a bigger story in this, and I'm hoping that we will share the entire story when we do bring them home. That there were 4 girls and, 4 boys and 2 girls that left from Sisseton Agency in 1879. The 4 boys are John Renville, Amos Laframboise, Edward Upright, and George Walker. Those 4 boys and 2 girls, the Laframboise girl, Julia Laframboise, and then Emily, I believe, Renville. And so the 4 boys that are there, all within a matter of like 3 to 4 years, all lose their life there at Carlisle. All 4 boys that we sent to Carlisle lose their life there. And The first one to die is Amos the Framboise. Amos the Framboise dies within 20 days. He arrives on November 6th and dies on November 26th. And, I'm not able to prove exactly why he died, although, like a lot of the records would note illness. 20 days, that's, it's a terrible short period of time. The second one to die would be John Renville. And when John Renville dies, there's a real big story that comes out with his death. And it's basically something that anybody that's been, that has had the, misfortune to have experienced the hardships of boarding school probably knows well. That John Renville was, according to the missionaries here at our school, these boys were said to be the 4 boys that leave from here. They're said to have been amazing young men. They had manners, they had intelligence. The school where they attended here at Sisseton Agency said that the only thing that they felt was the only thing they could complain about was that they hadn't stayed long. We imagined that they had completed their education. They were so well behaved and had such outstanding character. It said that George would fill the water pail without even being asked, and more than once. These were incredible young boys. We now know that it wasn't that they had completed their education, is that they were tapped to go to Carlisle when Carlisle first opens up. Carlisle and Captain Pratt and his plan there for assimilation of Indian children, the Sioux and their allies are the first to go there because the Sioux and their allies were most resistant to agreement. And that's verbatim. They were essentially brought there. They were to stay for 5 years and not be allowed to leave. And at one point I had read an article when I was actually researching on Kangi Duta and where our chiefs stayed when they went to Washington, D.C., and I saw in the newspaper it said that the chiefs are here in Washington, D.C., and as a condition to the negotiations, they will be allowed to see their children. So that basically means that they're being held hostage. If you come here to D.C. and sign and we're going to talk, then you'll get to see your child. That's a terrible, tool to, for our Native children. And the Rosebud relatives would say that, bear in mind that the 7th Cavalry and Custer, Little Bighorn had just happened. So in 1879, when their children are taken by steamboat, when they're loaded onto the steamboat, they're actually placed on a steamboat that had held people from the 7th Cavalry. And like Russell Eaglebear said, how do you think that those individuals felt about our Indian children? And I can only imagine. So there's a lot of things at play there when our children arrive. But for Amos to be the first to die there, what happens with him is he's buried in Cumberland County Cemetery. They were totally unprepared for a death. They bury Amos in Cumberland County, and after a while, the city people realize that he's buried there, and what they use is their land grant document that states that it is only for white people. And they petitioned to ask Captain Pratt to remove his little Indian from amongst the good people of Cumberland County and that cemetery there. So they disinter him there and they bury him again. What the researchers from Rosebud and myself, the one from Rosebud, his name is Gibbs, has always told me that he believes that that Amos was dug up and moved up to 4 times. The Army denies this. But why it's important is that when we go there to bring him home, and Amos Laframboise is the son of Joseph Laframboise, who's in every history book, and one of the founding fathers of 1867 in this reservation. And so he was certainly important to his father and his mother, no doubt. But when we go there and we disinter him, is he really where they placed him in that final move when they moved the cemetery to build, I believe, like a football field or some track, something of that sort? They moved all of our native children and placed them into where they are now. And so some of those that are there, the Army had told me that what they had were receipts for quality caskets. These are good caskets, he said. Why would the Army spend so much money like this if they weren't careful about when they moved them? And that was the only evidence that they had, and they insisted that each grave matches the name on the headstone, but there are unknowns there. So for the past 6-7 years, we've been trying to navigate all of this. For Amos Laframboise, finding the family line, the stories that go along with it. And that wasn't so hard to do. But then back to John Renville. When John Renville dies, it says in the Carlisle newspaper, it said that John Renville had been on, they had a camp set up. And they traveled to this camp during the summer, and that he had taken a sip from water at the creek. And thus came the fevers, and I can't remember what other symptom, and that no medicine or treatment could stop. It said that his little sister sat by him as he was basically succumbing to this illness, and that he talked to her in hushed tones, and she was doting over him. And the fact that he was so very sick, and from what I gathered from that he was looking out for his little sister in such a loving way. What a great big brother to worry more about her and how she was feeling than his own self. It was really sad. And then it said in the letter that we often see here at Carlisle characteristics of character and intelligence and manners and all of these things. And then it said, but all of these characteristics were exceptional in this young man. Our prayers are with his father, Gabriel Renville, as he takes his beautiful boy home. And it was really sad to read that and to know that, because I thought about, my own son and how much time you invest into them to teach them. It is no doubt in my mind that this young man would have been the next leader of our tribe, or that is the hope for Amos, for John Renville, and for every other young person that lost their life there at Carlisle, that they would come back and be educated and do things to take care of their community. So then when the next would be Edward Upright, and in the record it says that Edward had measles, and then he became sick. So that is said what he's supposed to have died from and then be buried there. The problem with Edward was, up until about 1 year ago, I could not find the Edward Upright family. And the Army is insisting that I find that next of kin. And how do you do that? It said on his headstone, or on his record, son of Wa'anata. That much we know. But I know that there are relatives. It's a big family, traditional chief line. And so what we found about a year ago, the Akichita, one of the Kit Fox that works with our office, had taken an interest in what I was doing and looked at all the papers. We were looking for translations of names and all of these things. He said, I'm going to take this. Is that okay? He said, I'm going to meet with our vets are going to meet. So he took it. And within a matter of a week, they contacted me and said, we found his father. I said, no, you didn't. I've been trying this for 6 years. No, you didn't. He said, yes, we did. They took me down to the BIA office. And basically what happened is one of the Kit Fox contacted another who knew another person within the BIA, and they found the probate. And what it turned out, it said, found myself sitting at a table, and it said on it, his first son having died many years ago at Carlisle. That was definitely him. So I flipped the pages back, like, who is this? Who are we talking about? And it said, Wa'anata of Spirit Lake. And so it turned out to be Wa'anata, not, there are next generations and names and stuff. And so I've often told the Army that this would be like if the Lakota were bringing home the son of Sitting Bull. This is Wa'anata. This is a traditional chief. We have to do these things with honor, with protocol. We have to do this our way. This is no small deal for any of these boys. And so once we determined a next of kin or somebody that could sign for the child, and my responsibility to contact KJ and Spirit Lake Nation, and your chairman, Chairman Yankton, came down, and we met with the Department of Defense to discuss these things. And we were at an impasse in how these things, their view of it was very, very narrow. Their responsibility was very, very narrow, and that was not acceptable to any of our leadership at the time, and still to this day. So what we've set out to do, and long story short, I'll just finish up with the four boys. So I mentioned Amos the Fromm boys and how many times he had been dug up and moved, and then John Renville, that importance of how great these boys were. And then 3 with Edward, Edward being the son of a great chief. And then 4, we have George Walker. And George Walker is very important to me. I still, to this day, have not found his parents. Akija Manning was in the audience the day that the Department of Defense was here. So, and I've told him, this young man, that when we do this, it would be important if you come with me, because what he had found in his own research, just learning our language and learning how to speak and all of this, he found a story in an old newspaper clipping about George Walker. One day I had found a letter written by George Walker to Sisseton, and Vine and I were looking at it, looking at the translation of it, and basically he's saying in it that since I've been here at Carlisle, nobody has written me. I haven't heard from anybody. And he says, like, there's some things that have happened here. I will tell you about it when I see you. He's hoping to come home. So the next letter that I find in the records is to Agent Chrissy, and it's saying that George Walker wants to come home, but we've convinced him to stay on a little longer. He wanted to come home. I think he was envisioning that since the boys left from our missionary school, that they would be able to come back and go to school there again. This is what George is thinking. All of the 3 boys that he came here with have died. He's the last one there, and he wants to come home. The next letter that we find is from Carlisle to Agent Chrissy, and saying, come and get him. Come and get him, because his state is affecting his health now. So the depression, the sadness, the lonesomeness that must have been a part of it, is just terrible. And whatever it was so bad, it was beginning to affect his health. So I, for many years, didn't know if he was one of the unknowns in a grave there. I still haven't been able to locate his parents. What Akisha showed me was that he did come home. He was brought home. He was actually an orphan, and he was raised by a grandma. So he did have somebody who loved him. But whatever had occurred and whatever, he loses his life here on these lands, though. And, but he was still a part of, all four of them were obviously, I guess I would say all four lost their lives there at Carlisle. And so with the four boys and then the two that are in the cemetery, in the effort to bring them home, and it had been so many years and we're not getting anywhere with the Department of Defense and some of the issues that we've talked about, the number one thing being that they will not recognize NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It does not apply here, they say, because this is an active military base and they're going to enforce their military policy. So we object to that because particularly at Sisseton and Wahpeton, where people like Jerry Flute and others, Mike Salvage was a part of that, all of these things that were related to NAGPRA and repatriation, and for that not to be recognized, all the problems that we find, the obstacles that we're having could be resolved if they use NAGPRA, but they're not. So it is, we're at that impasse, and it has resulted from the time that you all came here and we signed those affidavits in hopes of being able to bring our children home within a matter of months, and then to be sent a letter from the Army. And what happened is they sent the letter directly to the two signatures on those documents, not to me after working with them for over 6 years, not to the tribal chairman, nobody. And we were cut out of this process. So they're essentially saying that we as a tribe are not able to assert to bring our children home. They're only going to talk to whoever signed those documents as next of kin. So now we are in the process. This is an issue that I saw that Native American Rights Fund and their attorneys have taken an interest in, and we've been talking to council for a long time now, and as of, would it be yesterday, Chairman? As of yesterday, the agreement with NARF has been signed by Sisseton Wahpeton for Amos LaFramboise. That is absolutely huge. So now we can begin possible litigation and how we're going to proceed with this. The second thing to happen will be you all, Spirit Lake, for your child, Wa'anata, and that we, under our 67 treaty, talking about our treaty and using it, we're going to use it in this to bring our children home as Sisseton and Wahpeton of the 1867 treaty, and bring our children home. Some of the things that, I guess we've talked about and we envision happening with this, like with Rosebud, Russell Eaglebear and I had talked about the planning of bringing them home. What they did was they took them, when they brought them from D.C., they took them to the place called Whetstone Valley, or Whetstone there. That is the place where the Rosebud children last saw their relatives as they boarded the steamboats. That's the last place they saw people who loved them, and their feet were ever on the ground of the Lakota. So that was their intention. If we do the same, then for our children, it would be here at the site of our agency.
if we bring Amos and we bring Edward back to where they left from. And then from there, just like with Rosebud, the families took those children to their resting place. So hopefully that's where we're at with that. I wanted to share all of that because this is something that we're doing together, Spirit Lake and Sisseton Wahpeton of Lake Traverse. And it's, to me, a historic first step to have our agreement signed. So wanted to share that, and we'll be around here today if anybody has any questions. Not too hard of questions though, because I'd have to refer people to Eric Longy if they're tough questions. So thank you. Oh yes, if anybody has anything they'd like to share, any questions, we can answer now. Anybody? Everybody might.
Yeah, I mean, if you're done, we're done for the day. No one's got any other remarks, comments, issues they want to talk about? Could just sit, visit, go gamble together. So Delray, can you say a closing prayer for us? Just something, we'll check a little thank you.
Amatakiapi. I first want to say thank you to all our relatives that have come today to honor those that have come before us and have put their hearts and minds together to make these treaties to preserve this way of life for us, this land that we live on for. For without this land, we would not exist today. We wouldn't be here. Through their sacrifice, their blood, sweat, and tears, we continue today. We honor them by coming together and to remember what they've done for us. And for that, we are grateful. Oh, Takashna Wakantaka, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the safe travels that you've given families. Honor this way of life together. We ask that you'd be with them and their families as they continue to stay here together and to share stories and to share history, family history together. Watch over this time that we have with each other. Be with our young ones. Be with our elders. Ask that you'd go with us today and throughout the rest of together today and tomorrow. You us.